My fellow Americans, and to everybody else affected by our world hegemony, it is a sad day for all of us. Those of you who are well versed in world history will doubtless be aware of the rise of fascism in Germany throughout the 1930s. Sadly, there are people today who are unabashedly recreating the conditions which once enabled this powerful hatred to thrive, and the worst part of it is that they don't even know who they are. Yes, Uncle Sam wants you to help stop them, but in order to do so, we must first understand what exactly fascism is and what could possibly enable people to travel down this path of governance. Merriam-Webster defines fascism as follows. 1. A political philosophy, movement, or regime, as that of the fascisti, that exalts nation and often race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. 2. A tendency toward or actual exercise of strong autocratic or dictatorial control. Early instances of army fascism and brutality, according to J.W. Aldrich. The Oxford English Dictionary defines it thusly. 1. An extreme right-wing political system or attitude which is in favor of strong central government and which does not allow any opposition. 2. Extreme views or practices that try to make other people think and behave in the same way. Due to its World War II origins, first with Italy's Mussolini, and then its universal application today to Adolf Hitler, fascism is universally attributed to the Nazi Party. It is also true, however, that the Nazis represented a national socialist movement and employed quite a number of socialist programs. One example of this is the employment of social welfare programs. Another is their fierce defense of a government-provided healthcare system, as well as agrarian subsidies. One example that should resonate with most of you is the German Autobahn network, a system of state-built and maintained infrastructure, which were built in a program very similar to FDR's New Deal here in America. These are not all necessarily bad things, just because the Nazis did them. Though our question is why we consider FDR to be a progressive leader, and Adolf Hitler, on the other hand, to be a fascist. The short answer is the consolidation of power, though to be entirely fair, both leaders did enjoy a great deal of public support, and consolidated the power of their government, so this on its own is an unsatisfactory explanation. Others might posit nationalism. However, this patriotic philosophy was shared by both leaders as well. In fact, the main differences between what we consider to be a fascist state and what we consider to be a progressive state today is primarily two specific factors. The first of these is the suppression of individual freedoms, notably expressed via the suppression of freedom of speech, via the threat of violence, as the SS did in Nazi Germany. The second is the prioritization of a particular racial or ethnic group in a systemic way. For instance, the Nazi social welfare system prioritized ethnic Germans over other ethnic groups. Additionally, they displaced the Jewish population of Germany, consolidating them into ghettos and eventually shipping them off into concentration camps. The rationale for this was that the fallout of World War I had systemically oppressed the ethnic Germans. The fines levied by the Treaty of Versailles at the end of the war amounted to 132 billion marks, or $30 billion US back in the 1920s. Today, that would be equivalent to almost $500 billion. Germany was forced to give up land and lay down their national arms as well. These reparations were considered to disproportionately affect ethnic Germans, who were also being discriminated against frequently, both inside and outside of Germany after the war. Many people, including the famous economist John Keynes, criticized the reparations as being too harsh. Now, the strongest evidence for the German oppression was the idea that whilst everyone was dirt poor, the Jewish people, who were disproportionately connected with the banks and industry, were doing better on average than the ethnic Germans. During the Weimar Republic, the Jewish people seemed to be far more successful than the ethnic Germans were at the time. No one considered that the Jewish people fought for Germany in tremendous numbers during World War I, sacrificing approximately 12,000 men on the battlefield. nobody also considered that Christians and Muslims alike once considered working with money to be a dirty job, and as a result, the Jews were often assigned this position throughout the Middle Ages, and historically they've maintained it over time. The rationale was simply that the Jews were doing better on average, and that they held systemic power, which was oppressing the ethnic Germans, who were literally starving at the time. So, who could be considered to embody fascism today? Aside from the rare neo-Nazis, and I cannot think of a single elected politician who does represent them, the closest thing we have to fascists are the people who are advocating government legislation which exercises government power to enforce benefits for one race over another. However, this does not address the people who are normalizing fascism, the subject of this video. Now that we know enough about what fascism actually is, we need to address its normalization in society today. This is being done by a process of watering down the term, which refers to a broadening of the goalposts until they become so wide that the word itself becomes meaningless. Take, for instance, the case of Milo Yiannopoulos. Milo is a homosexual Christian conservative who purportedly only dates black men. It should be obvious to many people that he would be the very first to die under a legitimate Nazi regime. However, this does not stop thousands of people from claiming that he is a fascist, starting protest after protest at his speaking engagements. Consider the campaign to convince Simon & Schuster not to publish his book, or the recent riots at Berkeley characterized by bonfires, mass destruction, members of the public being beaten, in one case into a coma with a shovel, and fireworks being shot at the main auditorium. All of this to stop a man who is arguing for smaller government and freedom of speech. Ironically, the speech Milo intended to give on that day was in regards to cultural appropriation, and why he thinks it's actually a good thing to experience and embody elements of other cultures. This, of course, runs contrary to the predominant academic narrative that you should basically stick to your own culture, but it's perfectly consistent with individual freedoms. Milo's book on free speech is currently Amazon's #1 bestseller. As more people read it, they will begin to align Milo's views with the public accusations against him. If this agreeable and rather entertaining man is somehow a fascist, they might think, then fascism is really not so bad. More likely, they will recognize that Milo's views do not line up with traditional fascism, and then simply discredit the opinions of the person who levied the accusation. If they see this often enough, then once a legitimate fascist does come along, the public will not believe the people who are calling them out. Yeah, free speech is totally fascist is hardly an illegitimate response to the accusation at that point. Particularly considering that fascist mob mentality has been used here in an attempt to silence Milo. Knowing all this, I implore you to rise above. Uncle Sam, the spirit and founding principles of America, urges you to rise above it. We want you to stop normalizing fascism. To be clear, that means you. Yes, you who is accusing everyone to the right of Stalin of being a fascist. I'm not here calling for nobody to be called fascist anymore, of course. However, knowing what you know now, please relegate the accusation to people who are actually fascists. It could go a very long way towards stopping the rise of fascism sometime in the future.